Good morning, viewers. Today I am present before you with a detailed analysis of the poem written by P.B. Shelley, Ode to the West Wind. Before I begin the podcast, it is advisable that you keep a notebook and a pen so that you can jot down the important points relating to this particular topic. It is further advisable to use earplugs for better listening. So here I begin. The poem Ode to the West Wind has been composed by Shelley. He was a great romantic poet. The most distinguishing feature of his poetry is love for nature. Shelley was just like an angel beating his luminous wings in the void. His lyrical power is equal to the highest to be found in any language. Just like the dramatic genius of Shakespeare, his works are recognized to be the supreme gifts in literature. In spite of the passion that pervades Shelley's lyrics, he is seldom shrill and tuneless. The choice of his subject makes it convenient to divide his work into two broad groups. The first reflecting his visionary outlook, and the second shorter lyrics. All of his visionary poems shows him as a hero, a rebel against tyranny, and a leader in the struggle which is to bring about the ultimate happiness of humanity. Sometimes the symbols employed by Shelley are not very clear, and thus they confuse the reader. In his shorter lyrics, we find him in a gloomy state, concerned with the thought of death or his own sense of despair or loneliness. This ode is a wonderful invocation to the west wind, and it is quite similar to the hymns chanted while worshipping the elements of nature. The opening lines of the ode are addressed to the mighty west wind, in which the poet projects the idea that west wind is the breath exalted by the autumn. Personification is employed by the poet so as to give a nice effect to the poem. He says that just like the ghosts, the leaves are moving out of sight at the arrival of the west wind. The personification employed by the poet is very powerful and describes that west wind is very powerful too. The leaves which are shown to be flying at the approach of west wind are yellow, black, pale and hectic red, and these colors of the leaves present images associated with death, disease and calamity. This image of death reaches its climax when the fleeing dead leaves are compared to people running away from pestilence stricken areas. The west wind is so much powerful that it scatters the winged seeds and drives them to the dark, cold beds under the earth. These seeds are just like dead bodies who are lying in the grave and are unable to rise till the spring season arrives. After the autumn season, when the spring season comes, these sleeping seeds are awakened by the trumpets blown by the spring, as if they are like soldiers who are called up to conduct their duties. Shelley compared the spring season with shepherd who drives his flock of sheep to the fields so that they can graze. The spring season is the season of sweetness, and thus it fills the valleys and hills and buds and flowers with beautiful color and sweet memories. The west wind is called the wild spirit and is a destroyer because it drives away the rotten leaves, breaking them and scattering them all over, but at the same time, it is a preserver too, who protects these seeds by making them underground so that they can be sprouted in the spring season. The wind is compared to a charioteer who drives the seeds to their abode where they hibernate during the winter season. In the next stanza, the clouds are compared with the withered leaves. They are shown to be falling on the surface of the west wind, just as the dry leaves fall on the surface of earth. The poet presents a picture of storm which is getting ready to blow suddenly. The imagery of leaves are replaced by human imagery. The clouds become the hair of a huge giant. The black hair of the storm is spread on the blue waves on the surface of the west wind. The hair of the storm is spread as it seems to be like the disheveled hair of some intoxicated female follower Maenad, who is the follower of Bacchus, the god of wine. The west wind is shown to be singing a mournful funeral song over the death of this ear. A tomb is shown to be erected on the grave of this dying ear. The collective strength of clouds is shown to be like an arched roof over the tomb, and the vapors and clouds are presented in such a manner as if they are canopying the tomb. The third stanza of the ode shows the effects of west wind on the Mediterranean Sea, which is being personified here. The sea is shown to be sleeping and is awakened by the gust of strong west wind. The sea is dreaming about the palaces and towers which are at far off places, but the west wind drives away the unreal thoughts of the Mediterranean Sea. This west wind, after disturbing the Mediterranean Sea, reaches the Atlantic Ocean and throngs its water in an agitating state. The ocean, which was in a quiet state, receives the strong blow of west wind, and it creates an upheaval in the ocean, thereby trembling and giving a death blow to all the creatures. After describing the effect of west wind on the different natural things, it becomes extremely personal and subjective. He now establishes a relationship between west wind and himself. The poet wishes that if he were a dead leaf, the wind would have carried him. If he would have been a cloud, he would have flown away with the wind. And again, if he would have had been a wave, he would have panted and quivered beneath the power of west wind. The poet would have shared the power, force, and freedom of west wind. While sharing his feelings, he recalls his boyhood days, when he was energetic and powerful and was ready to take any challenge just like the west wind. He compels the west wind to uplift him as a cloud, a dead leaf, a wave, because in suffering from pain and is bleeding into death. The speed and freedom now sums to be a vision, and it seems as if he is weighed down by his misfortune. Long ago, the poet was just like the west wind, swift and proud. The last stanza of the poem presents the details of the identification established between the poet and the west wind. The poet wants the wind to blow on him in such a manner as it blows on the forest leaves. The poet wants the spirit of west wind to become his own spirit. He asks the wind to drive away his dead and lifeless ideas and wants new, worthy ideas. He appeals to the wind to spread his thought all over the universe so that his thought may herald the birth of a new era. His thoughts are not dead completely. They are like ash and are thus capable to spark if given life by the strong west wind. He wants that the prophetic note of west wind should spread throughout the world, and the west wind should be his mouthpiece. The poet concludes his ode by saying that just as the winter followed in natural course by spring, similarly, this era of evil and misery will soon be followed by an era of perfect happiness, love, and beauty. The poem is presented in a sonnet sequence, each section comprising of 14 lines. He is dramatic when showing the three levels of nature: the land, the sky, and the sea. A number of figures of speech have been employed in the poem, like alliteration, simile, personification, oxymoron, onomatopoeia, and has an archaic diction. Rhetorical questions have been asked by the poet too. The ode is a beautiful composition of revolutionary poet Shelley and presents a very graceful description of the west wind. It is an enjoyable as well as a delightful work of the romantic poet. So this was all about the detailed analysis of Ode to the West Wind. I hope this podcast proves to be of help in making you understand this great poem in a better way. Please do like, share and subscribe to the channel, and in the comment section below share your feedback. Thank you for your valuable time. Here's wishing you a great day ahead.